They died, when they died, the letters went to their daughter, Mary Elizabeth Hoyt, Meg. And Meg was very unhappily married and was divorced and didn't have any children. So when her sister, my great-grandmother, Sarah Ann Hoyt, decided to go up to Canada to homestead, Meg joined her and they went to southern Alberta. Sarah Ann's husband, my great-grandfather, disappeared in 1898. He was taking cattle on a drive to a mining town. He'd done that before to earn money, and he just disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him. The thought is that his cattle were stolen and that he was murdered. But Sarah was left with her children to raise, and a sister-in-law had also been widowed. So the three women went up to southern Alberta to homestead. And when Meg died, she didn't have any children, so she passed the letters down to my grandmother, Florelle Love. Both Meg and my grandmother were genealogists. They wrote to family members. They held on to the letters. They tried to gather more information. When Grandma died, the letters from her side of the family and the few that came from my grandfather's were divided up between my two aunts, Donna Spackman and Geraldine or Deanie Ursenbach. And my father is Bud Palmer, their older brother, and there's me. And Deanie and I have cabins that are next door to each other in Waterton Park in southern Alberta. And so in the summer we get together and we work on things and we divide up kind of the tasks. And so that's the provenance of the letters. Here's the family grouping. And I understand, it sounds like you are all descended from William Sperry. I'm assuming that's right. And I come from Betsy. Charles and Harrison also have a lot of descendants in the Utah area, I know. The real heroine of this story, though, is Sarah. And she is the one that was determined to stay in touch with her family. And she continued to write letters and beg for letters back and wanted information about her family. And it's understandable because she was in her 20s when the family made the decision to go west and left her behind. Or she chose to stay behind. And she really, it's obvious that they loved each other in this family and she wanted to stay in touch with her siblings. She also, I think because her parents died so young when she was in her 20s, wrote to their siblings. So and here, I thought this was kind of her theme. We are widely separated by mountains, desert, and rivers. Yet by the aid of pen and ink, we can converse with each other, and I intend to improve this privilege. And she did. She worked at it. So she also wrote to Joy's sister Minerva and Mary's sister Elizabeth, asking for information about her parents. And then as the letters would come to her, sometimes she would send them on to Betsy, and then Betsy would save them. And that's how we have those letters. Sarah, at one point, wrote to Meg and said, that she had a whole basket full of letters and she didn't know what to do with them. She would just go through them and reread them. And it just breaks my heart because I know those were the letters our ancestors wrote to her. And probably her sons, burned them or saved them for a while or threw them out or whatever. But thank goodness for her because she did everything she could to pass on information. And some of that information went to Betsy and was saved. So when she was writing to Minerva, Joy's younger sister, Minerva was living in Cattaraugus County. I don't know if that's pronounced correctly. And if any of you know better, you're welcome to unmute and tell me. In Randolph. And Sarah wrote to her from where she was living in Illinois. The Sperrys had come from this part of New York, right below Lake Ontario. And in a detailed area, here's East Bloomfield, where Joy and Mary were married and their two oldest children were born. And then they moved up to Monroe County, where Elizabeth and Phoebe were born. So Minerva, in writing back to Sarah, talking about Joy, she said, "You ask if I can cast my mind back and remember things that transpired 50 years ago. I answer yes, I remember many things that happened 70 years ago when Brother Joy was a young man and there used to be young folks parties and I and my twin sister were young girls. And when there was a party, sometimes Brother Joy would take us along and how I did enjoy the pleasure I remember he used to be quite a leader in all that was going on, especially in singing. I used to think his word was law, and I was careful not to offend him. So I feel like from this letter, we get a little bit of information about Joy that follows with what I've heard in my family. We've always heard that the Sperrys were very musical, and my grandmother was very, very musical, had a beautiful voice, and played multiple instruments and the piano. My father did not take after her, but my grandmother was very musical. And we'd heard that the Sperrys were, and I don't know if that's true in your family, but in our family that was. And the fact that he was such a strong leader, I think, comes through in this as well, that he had strong opinions and people listened to what he had to say. And we see that as they make their decisions later. And then Minerva, writing about Mary Lamont, says, "You ask if I remember anything about your mother. I do indeed. I remember living with her for a week or two during her confinement. I think it was the winter before she moved west from Monroe County. I remember she had a little baby girl. I remember she was a very amiable woman, kind-hearted and loving wife and mother. She was always calm and patient, let what would happen." And this picture of Mary as being someone calm and loving, I think, follows through in the letters too, the few references there are to her. The baby that she was having at that time was probably Phoebe, and Mary's own mother was named Phoebe. I'm sure that she named her baby after her. Mary's mother died when she was 10 or 11. And that's one of the themes, I think, in genealogy, isn't it? That there are so many children who lose their mothers when they're very young, and this was another one. Now, the sad part about this letter is that Minerva says she remembers lots of things and she doesn't write any more about them. Instead, she writes about how she'd been to a medium and the spiritualist had helped her get in touch with a brother, and she thinks it was Joy. And she's really encouraging Sarah, maybe to pursue that if she wants to know more about Joy. And I'm sure she's just offering the comfort that she had, but I wish she'd written more about the things that she knew. So any comments or questions or anything? It's weird to just have it be quiet.
I have a question.
Okay.
What letter is that? The ones that you were just referencing, are those on Family Search? Those letters? Okay.
The one from Minerva is both under Minerva, and then anybody that it mentions, Mary and Joy. And at the end of this, we'll have to talk about the best way to do the letters on Family Search, because you may have some other ideas than, I try to do a transcription in the letters. I think Betsy got a letter from Elizabeth Lamont, Mary's sister. I don't remember if she was older or younger. And there isn't any extra information about the family. It's just what's happening in her part of the world and her descendants and things. So there isn't any information about Joy or Mary in that, except that she had written to Mary after she moved to Ohio and never heard back, and wasn't sure if the letters had even gotten to her. So the family moved in the early 1820s, they went to Mecca. And here's Mecca in Ohio. And we know that both from Charles' memories and from a Trumbull County book that he had a sawmill there. The Trumbull County website has a map of 1830 and who were the original who were the landowners in 1830. And the ones in red are Joy's land. One of those is where he had a sawmill. His brother Aaron Sperry is here, and his brother George Sperry is up here. He had an older sister, Arabella, and her son Enoch is here, and son-in-law Ira is here. So very typical of the time, there was a large family group that went. There's an 1840 map too, and of course Joy has left by that point, but it mentions a couple of families who are living in this area, the Chafees and the Crafts. And Sarah references them in an 1882 letter to Betsy. She's just talking about how she had stayed in touch. She'd written back to Mecca to some of their childhood friends, and they left in the 1830s. So it had been a long time since she'd lived there, but she still wrote back, and she had started a correspondence with the Chafees. And in it, I thought she had some things that were kind of interesting in this letter. She's just giving her news about all of the people that used to live there. Clarissa C. married A. Craft and live on the old place, which was close to where the Sperrys lived. And then she asks, was I born on the Craft place? I don't remember. Aaron was. And it's interesting, on Family Search, it has Aaron as having been born in Loudonville, Ohio. But according to Sarah, she remembers him being born here in Mecca. So we might want to change that. Aaron was. I remember that dark night that you led me to the Bill's house across the road. And the next morning I put a piece of Johnny cake in his mouth. And I remember what a face he made up, which to me is kind of cute. So I don't know if Mrs. Craft was a midwife, but it sounds like Betsy and Sarah and their mother were all at the Craft place so that Aaron could be born. And then 10-year-old Betsy takes 5-year-old Sarah, and they go across the street and wait. And then the next morning they come back and see their new little baby brother. And she tries to feed him Johnny cake, which I guess didn't go over very well. Then the Chafees wrote to her, and she sent one letter on to Betsy. And in it, he just has a little note. Do you remember going swimming in the old mill dam? And probably their sawmill, huh? And such a different kind of life than we live now. But it gives us kind of a picture of what their life was like when they lived in Ohio. So any thoughts about that? So now we're moving on to Illinois and to the La Harpe area. The entire family ends up in La Harpe, including John and his wife. His wife, Florella Oatman, is the sister of Marianne's husband, Royce Oatman. And Marianne and Royce get married in La Harpe. Betsy has a child in 1842. She's not married, Josie, and Helen Josephine her name was, but she went by Josie most of her life. And there's some question in the family as to who the father of Josie was. And in our family, we don't know. My aunt said that there were some rumors that she might have been raped, but they also said they really never heard it from anybody that would know. I know there's the story that she was raped by a mob, anti-Mormon mob, but Josie was conceived in 1841. So I think that's a little less likely to have been anti-Mormon sentiment at that time, or at least a mob. There may have been somebody, but however Josie was conceived, she was evidently very loved. The family loved her, and Sarah mentions her in a lot of letters. She just was part of their family. So the entire family is there. And then in 1846, Joy decides that they are going to follow the 12 apostles and Brigham Young and leave Nauvoo as the anti-Mormon sentiment gets hotter. And I know Charles has written about that, and I think Harrison might have too, about the mob action that did occur in 1846. Now, the letters offer just little glimpses into what this was like, because at this point the family splits up, and John and Marianne stay in La Harpe. Sarah, in one of her letters, references their house, and I thought it was interesting because the house sounds like they planned to live there forever. They weren't planning on moving again as they had before. She talks first about Josie. I wonder if Josephine remembers slipping through the garden fence and going to see Kate, the next door neighbor. I went to look at our old home. This was in 1870. She'd just been back to visit. It was a mournful pleasure to walk through the yard and garden, to look upon those large locust trees and the apple trees and the same currant bushes that our dear father planted. I felt like putting back the tears that came unbidden and said to myself, oh, what a change. And I think of them in this very nice situation where they'd put down roots, and it sounds like until the anti-Mormon action, they were happy in that area. They were considered main citizens of the community. Then Phoebe Sperry, who was John's daughter, wrote to Betsy in 1865, and she said about that day where they left, where they decided to go, I can very well remember the day that Grandpa and Ma and all of my uncles and Aunt Betsy started away from La Harpe to parts unknown. And I still remember Aunt's little girl. So Josie was 4 and Phoebe was 6, and she still remembers that leave taking, which must have been very for a family that cared so much about each other, it must have been very hard. So John and Mary stayed behind in La Harpe, and Sarah went with them to the Mississippi River. And that year, just a few months later, after they had gone to Mount Pisgah, that's where Mount Pisgah is, she wrote and she said, "I ne'er shall forget that morning that we parted in silence and in tears on the bank of that lonely river past." And to me, that just is so heartbreaking. Sarah went on to go up to Ogakwa, and she had probably a relationship with Asa Abbott by that time. She stayed with Mrs. Abbott. She worked in a tavern. And within the year, they were married and they moved up to Whiteside County, which is where most of the letters that she wrote to Betsy come from. So this was one of the coolest experiences of my genealogy life, was reading and handling this letter that Betsy wrote in June of 1846. And at that point, she's in Mount Pisgah. Betsy had not been baptized a member of the church. I think Charles was not either, but the rest of the family had been. And so she's very frank about what is going on. And it was really interesting to me to read, because I had this picture of Mormon pioneers being just stalwarts and they never looked back. And that's not the case for Betsy. So she was trying to let Sarah know how everyone was doing, and she mentions every sibling in this letter. So if you haven't read it, be sure and go to the transcriptions and read it. This is just a small excerpt. So she writes, "I thought that when we got here, this would be a stopping place for us. But Pa is no more contented here than he was in La Harpe. The 12 are the most of them are at Council Bluff, and they have sent word into camp, Mount Pisgah, for all those that did not come here in time to put in crops, to repair there to Council Bluff, for there provisions are plenty and cheap. Pa thinks of starting about the 1st of September and moving on to Council Bluff and wintering near there." And this kind of was a real surprise to me. She wrote, "I shall go on there. Then there will be a chance for me to come down the Missouri when I get funds sufficient. You may look for me next spring if I am not satisfied with living in the West." Writing about her mother's state of mind, "Mother has had her mind made up to go immediately back, but she has given it up. She is anxious to hear from you and how John and Mary Ann gets along." It sounds like it was just really hard for her mother to leave behind her grandchildren and 3 of her children. "You had all of you better gather up and come west if you ever expect to see Father. He never will go back while he lives," which fits in with that strong leader that his sister Minerva wrote about. She also, just tells slice of life things. "We have just got a shanty built and got into it. When they were raising it, Helen, Josie, wanted to know if it was a corn crib, which lets you know how small it was and what her house was like that they had come from. You can judge something how it looked. The most of them here live in wagons and tents. There is a few shanties here. Helen calls her name Josephine the cabin girl. Doesn't that sound like a 4-year-old who thinks it's an adventure?" So at Mount Pisgah, we know that Mary became ill. All of the family became ill, and Mary died and was buried in Mount Pisgah. There is a memorial there. My husband and I just went there last fall on our way back from Canada, and it had a name of many of the people who died there, but not all of them. And Mary's name is not on the memorial. But it is a sad place, and it's sad to think that at this point, their mother, whom they loved so much, passed away. Then Sarah got this letter and immediately wrote back in August. It took a while for the letter to get to her. It was July, I think, before she got it. And it's interesting to look at the address, Miss Elizabeth Sperry, Mount Pisgah, and then in parentheses, "Oh Lordy, Camp of Israel via Nauvoo." And up here, the letter, they'd already moved on. And so it was redirected to the Bluffs. So
Sharon, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So the way that letter is addressed is, "Oh Lordy," it's capitalized. Do you think that there was a reference to the town Mount Pisgah being called Lordy?
No, I think that it was her saying, "Oh my gosh,
Okay.
What are you in for?"
Okay.
I think it was just a comment. I think Mount Pisgah, Camp of Israel was the address. And she just added an aside about she couldn't believe it, probably couldn't believe they were there.
And I just want to say one thing. If you guys look at this letter, imagine transcribing it. Sharon has just done a monumental effort figuring out from which place it moves, from which part of this paper. So thank you, Sharon. You're amazing.
Oh, sure. And I have to say on the transcriptions too, they didn't use a lot of punctuation, and we added periods and commas. And sometimes we couldn't read what you can see up there. There's the stain. Just couldn't, even enlarging it, we couldn't figure out what was going on. These are the ones that I did. My aunt did some of the other letters, but these are not. I did the Sperry letters. I say we because we've worked on things together. So this becomes her theme. Although we are a great distance apart, still we can write to each other. And she is determined that through letter writing, they are going to stay in touch. And her siblings don't always respond. Oh, sometimes it's just heartbreaking. She hasn't heard from them for a year or 2 years, and she wants to know how they're doing. But she does her part. She really does. Sarah does. She talks about what happened after she left the Mississippi River. When I left you, I went to John Jay. I don't know if that's her brother John, or if I'm not sure, and stayed 1 week, and a lonesome week it was too. You can only imagine how it was to go back home without her parents and her siblings. When I went back, I called to the old house and took dinner. It looked so deserted that I could not believe my own eyes. I thought it must have been a dream. It still looks like home. Isn't that just heartbreaking? And heartbreaking on the other side of the river too, where they've left that. Then she mentions William. He's at La Harpe. He only stopped here about 2 hours. And I think that at that point she was in Ogawa. I have not heard from him since. He said that he should go back there, I think to Iowa again this fall, and wanted me to go with him, but I cannot get ready so soon. I may sometime go there, but it is rather uncertain where my lot will be cast. And I think she's, it's her relationship with Asa. Is that going to work out? She's not ready to commit to leaving. Then she writes, I received a letter from Marianne last week. Marianne was still in La Harpe. She and her family are well, but she is very much troubled about you. She is still of the opinion that you have all gone to the land of starvation and destruction, which is interesting because this is a contemporary corroboration of that story that Royce and Joy had an argument about how if the Sperry family followed the 12 apostles, they were going to starve and die. And of course, we know what happens to his family, but it's interesting. This is a contemporary account. I hope not, but I am afraid the worst time with you has not yet come yet, but hope for the best. And then I love this because it references her mother again. It is hope that keeps the heart whole, so I've heard my mother say. So we know that they move on up to Council Bluff. And then of course, illness, it continues, and Aaron dies, and then Joy dies. And according to Harrison and Charles, he gathered them together and made them promise that they would go west. And so Betsy, who wasn't a member and wasn't sure she wanted to go, I don't know if by this point she's changed her mind, but she agrees to go, and the family go west. In the La Harpe camp, this is on Family Search. I love this, someone else added this. And this is an accounting of an inventory of what the saints have when they're crossing the plains. And here's William and Betsy, Charles and Harrison, and then little Josie. They've got 3 teamsters with the men and 2 wagons. And actually, compared to some of the other people, they're doing pretty well. And then they're going to be the Heber C. Kimball Company, it says. 1 shovel, 2 hoes, chest of tools.
And one thought back there on that that inventory, what we know about the people trying to get to the valley, then they had nothing, right? So the fact that they could say they had something,
right,
they were a people of means.
Yeah, they already had their wagons, they had oxen, they had horses. In the letter and in the memories of the boys too, they talk about how the boys were going back to sell horses so that they could get more oxen. Yeah, they were better set up than most people were, I think. I mean, they'd lost their father, their mother, and their brother, but they had the physical means to go, unlike, especially some of the later saints were so destitute. Even some of the ones then, though, who were encouraged to stay until they had. So they end up in the Salt Lake Valley. And then Mary Ann and her family go down to Independence. And then they're following the Brewsterites. And I think everyone's familiar with this story. They have some disagreements and end up traveling alone. And things do not go well in their trip, but they're following the Santa Fe Trail going south. On that inventory, it was kind of interesting too, because Betsy married Timothy Hoyt, and his parents and a couple of siblings are listed in that inventory too as part of the La Harpe camp. So it's possible they knew each other before. Betsy did join the church a year after they came to the valley, as did Charles. So two of the wonderful letters that Sarah sent on to Betsy to share with the family were letters that she received from Mary Ann while Mary Ann was on the trail. And so in the first one from July of 1850, she wrote, "We are encamped about 20 miles from Independence upon the border of the Indian Territory. The Indians visit us every day and bring us green corn, beans, and blackberries. They are very friendly and cultivate large farms." I only knew recently. I thought that they were all plains Indians with horses, more nomadic. It's only recently that I learned that many of the Indian tribes were farmers, and it sounds like in this case they were very friendly.
Can I make a comment about that?
Sure, you bet.
So something that's super interesting about Native American culture in North America is the vast majority of what we know about Native Americans has actually been suppressed by the Smithsonian Institute.
Oh, is that right? That's interesting.
Yeah, super fascinating, because there was a big survey that was done in the mid 1800s by a man by the Smithsonian Institute that he has published. And quite frankly, what we have been taught by the Native American, about the Native American populations in America is almost 100% false. That there were huge civilizations that were destroyed by the westward expansion.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And
yeah,
I can concur with Cindy. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I've come to realize that too, especially living in Georgia, where the Cherokee Indians were farmers. They had a newspaper here before they were expelled. It was very different than what I had thought. And I thought that in the Midwest, the Kansas, Nebraska area, I really thought they were all nomads at that point. But I have since learned that they were farmers. They had towns, they had trade. So yeah.
Something that's super interesting is John Wesley Powell. Actually, so everybody credits him with kind of showing the West to everybody. He literally took costuming with him and dressed the Native Americans up in his costumes and took pictures.
Oh, that's just, yeah. I think we have a lot to answer for. That part of our history is just painful, isn't it? And so getting to her second letter in October, she wrote, "We have plenty of milk, which is very good among the children." I think that they were taking cows with them. "We had found grapes in abundance on some part of the road. We also got a plenty of buffalo meat and some antelope, which was the best meat I ever ate." And she also mentions in this letter how her son Lorenzo, I think, was the one that killed the antelope, and he was so proud. "I expected to get very tired of traveling, but I cannot say that I am. We get along much better than I expected to." And that's just kind of sad, knowing what we know about what happened to them. I found this in, I can't remember which museum, and so put this on Family Search. This isn't one of our family letters, but this is a plea for help from Royce Oatman in February 1851 to the nearest fort. And he wrote, "I am under the necessity of calling upon you for assistance. There is myself, wife, and 7 children. And without help, sir, I am confident we must perish." And he went on to say that they'd been robbed, that his animals had been stolen from him, that, they really were struggling. And I think it's the Yavapai Indians that were not, happy about the incursions, and they were trying to get through that area, but we all know it didn't end well. So in February, just probably a few days after that letter was written, Royce was killed, Mary Ann, Luce, Lucy, Royce, Charity, and Roland. Lorenzo was thrown off a cliff, but survived. Marianne and Olive were taken as slaves to the Yavapai and then sold, I think, to a branch of the Mojave. We lived for 30 years on the Mojave Desert, and our local newspaper had an article about Olive Oatman going through that area. And man, that was not good territory. It was really subsistence living when they lived there. Of course, we all know, I've looked through old newspapers and they are 3 and 4, 5-page account. Well, that's an exaggeration, but they are 2 and 3-page accounts of Olive being found. It was quite the sensation. And her story was written up by the Reverend, I forget his name. And I think that he changed things for the sensibilities of the time in her story. She certainly she went on the lecture circuit. She made money. She was reunited with Lorenzo, and they lived with Sarah and would visit with her off and on. But I remember the account where she was in New York, and I think she was going to school there, I'm not sure. And the member of the band that she had been with, this Indian band, was in New York as well. I think he was the son of the chief, and she went to meet him. She was happy to see him. She spoke in his language. I think that they treated her like a family member, and they struggled and suffered along with her and with her sister. I had heard that her sister died of starvation, and one of my cousins told me that it was a fever instead, that she had some illness. I also had heard that those slash marks on her dress were representative of her tattoos. But I have a cousin who's the curator of textile and costume at the Royal Museum of Ontario in Toronto. And she told me that was a very common design at the time, that it's very chic. She is wearing the most fashionable of clothing. And she's really beautiful, isn't she? Sarah says that she looks like Royce's family, didn't look like the Sperrys. Here's another picture.
One more thought about this.
Sure.
There have been so many books written, and many of them are simply not factual.
Yeah.
And so there's one that I think we can trust.
Which one is that, Cristine?
Well, I'm going to have to email it to you because I can't remember the title right at the moment, but I think we do have to be really careful about the material we read on her because it was sensationalized.
Oh, so much so. And since then, even in modern times, I think people have sensationalized it kind of the other way. She is, in the old Reverend story, she is the virginal white girl that is saved when she's taken out of this civilization, uncivilized people.
The preacher that took over her life was not a good person. He was not a good person.
Although I guess in the book, and I've read it, but it's been a long time, it doesn't make them out to be totally evil, which was probably something. But I know that when she went back to the fort, they took her to the fort. She had her Indian sister go with her, and it was only when they got close that she wanted to have white women's clothing. She had assimilated, and there are a lot of stories of kids that were stolen or kidnapped or sold to different Indian tribes who did not want to be rescued. And I think she may have been of two minds. They were her family too. They took care of her. And I think some of the current stories too sensationalize it the other way, where the Indians are the innocents and, the white. There's just such a mixed thing. It's just, anyway, the second picture is one I'd never seen before, and it was on Family Search. And it was found in California. And it turned out that Harrison had lived with this family. And I don't know if this was a copy he got from Olive, or if it was one that he gave to the family. But he worked in a mining area. He worked in a mine for a while in California, and this stayed there. And then it was donated to Family Search, or put on Family Search. And again, she looks very fashionable, very beautiful. One thing I thought was sad was hearing that her husband, when she got married, was not happy about her tattoos and wanted her to wear a veil when they were in public. And I don't know, it just feels sad to me. They didn't have children of their own. I think they adopted a child. Lorenzo had a couple of children, and one of them, according to Sarah, fell out of a wagon when he was a child and was killed, and the other one died. And so neither of them none of Mary Ann did not have any descendants that lived, but interesting family, huh?
Very much so.
So the last really bunch of letters are from John, who stayed back in Illinois. And this was one that had been sent to Sarah, and Sarah sent it on to Betsy, and so that she could stay in touch. And John, of course, being in Illinois in 1864, the Civil War is raging, and there are a lot of young men from Illinois who fought in the Civil War. And John had 4 sons who joined up. And in this letter, he talked about 2 of his boys. Orrin has been home on furlough and has returned to the front. We received word that they had got back to Chattanooga. And we know that Orrin was killed in the battle of just a few months after this. He had a wound in his arm, which must have become infected, and he died. Then he talked about his other son, Eli. Eli, he got home from New Orleans on furlough. He has re-enlisted. Eli went to see his cousin, John Oatman. He was going to get on the cars to come up to Carthage and got crushed between the cars and the platform. Richard Comstock, a friend of theirs, got him in an omnibus and took him across the river to a hospital. The hospital at the time in Keokuk was John goes on to say it's the best hospital he's ever seen. He's getting the finest care possible. It was a military hospital, and it had been a hotel, and there were a lot of really able doctors and a lot of patients, and he probably did get the best care for his time. But within a couple of weeks, John and Florella did go out to visit him, but things were different in those days. They didn't stay with him. It looked like they thought he was going to die, looked like he was getting better. The doctors were amazed. They considered it a miracle. And he had to go back home to his farm and to take care of things. And after he got back home, Eli died either of his wounds or internal bleeding, infection. There were just so many things that killed people in those days. Then he wrote my 2 youngest in the Army, I've not heard from for 2 months, but they both survived the war. So more tragedy, the things that this family faced, Mary Ann's family, John's family, the parting at the Mississippi, and then John and Mary dying so young. It's kind of heartbreaking. So just as a coda, this was a letter that Sarah Sperry wrote to Meg. Meg had written that her mother, Betsy, was very, very ill and probably going to die in 1884. And Sarah wrote back that same day that she got the letter, but it was too late. But this was her message. Tell your mother, if we never meet again here, that we hope to meet in the bright hereafter, where many of our loved ones have gone. Sarah and John did go west after the railroad in the 1870s. They both came and visited. That's referenced in the letters. Sarah's son, Charles, married her brother Charles' daughter, Sarah. And so she had grandchildren in Utah. They went to Kansas for a while, and then they went back to Utah. So I think that was part of the reason she came to visit. They both referenced how they were the most terrific visits, that they loved coming out and meeting everybody. They were well treated. Timothy Hoyt had a brother that came out to visit from Iowa, and he talked about how they went up in the mountains and went camping and had a fire, like all the fun camping things. And from people on the Illinois and Iowa, those mountains probably seemed really beautiful and exotic. And I think that Sarah and John probably had those things too, where they were shown the best of Utah, the best of Nephi. But anyway, that is the end of my presentation.
Well, that was wonderful. Questions? Do we have questions for Sharon?
Or comments? Things that you know.
Uncle Mont, we can't hear you.
So you just need to unmute yourself, Uncle Mont. Right at the top.
No. Shoot.
Yeah. Do you see where to unmute?
All right, now you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
I'm used to the old touchscreen computer we had. Anyway, I just wanted to make a comment about how real these people become from these letters. I mean, I hadn't experienced this. I hadn't known about what had really happened and about the splitting of the people, those who came west versus those who stayed east. And Terrell and I will, when we were in New York on our mission, why we visited some of the places where these relatives lived. Anyway, this has been wonderful, and thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And I feel the same way. I feel like they are real people to me. And sometimes I cry, at some of the things that they write, just the efforts that they made to stay in touch when it was so hard to stay in touch.
That's incredible.
I do think we need to go on family search and probably change Aaron's birthplace. Williams is also put as Loudonville in Ohio, Ashland County. Does anyone know why that is? Or I hadn't heard that they had left Mecca. I thought they went right from Mecca. I wonder if that's a mistake too, in other words. I don't know. But Aaron, obviously, that should be changed.
Sharon, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm Christy's sister. I just want to say thank you so much. When I first got the letters and tried to transcribe them, I was totally lost. So I so appreciate everything you did. It's amazing what we can learn. And I love all the research that you've done to put it all together so that it's more meaningful too. It's just, thank you so much. It's really great information.
That's so kind. I really appreciate it. And I like to put it in context, to figure out what's going on. And transcribing is kind of hard, but I feel like right now I have a lot of time in my life. I'm retired and I've got the time and the energy. And this is, I'm doing a bunch of other family history projects, but I still have things, Sperry Letters, that I need to finish and put online as well.
We'll be watching for those. That is amazing.
Are you Kathy Torkelson?
No, I'm Kathy Tidwell.
Tidwell. Okay. There's a Kathy Torkelson that's a Sperry descendant too that I've heard from. So
is there a book coming? Is there something concrete that you might be putting? Sorry, this is the thought.
I thought that you did that, Christy. I thought you did that.
Uncle Mont, you want to take this on?
Pardon me?
Uncle Mont, do you want to take on a book?
Probably not.
You know what? If I ever do, I'll let you know, because there are a lot of, I think the photos and the maps and, there are a lot of things that can make it seem more real. And I'm always trying to get my kids to be more interested. So far, not with any success.
So we did record this session. Sharon, are you okay if we share it with family that didn't get?
Sure. Yeah, you bet.
Okay. I connected with 27 people on Family Search that had put up sources, and I can see a couple of them on three, I think, on today. So if you would like this recording sent to you, just email me and we'll make that happen.
Well, and I would appreciate if anybody hears more information. I didn't reference much Charles or Harrison's memories. Also, is there another picture of William? There's only that little tiny, it's just in that crowd shot.
That's all we have.
Yeah.
Still looking.
Yeah. The one picture we have of Betsy, well, we have another one of her in a crowd, but the one picture of Betsy, when she sent it back to Sarah, I felt sorry for Betsy because Sarah wrote, "I don't even recognize you." You don't look anything like, I had to look at that for a long time to even see you in there. And I thought, oh, that's harsh. That must have, but it had been, probably 20 years, 25 years. So.
Wow. Wow.
Pat, do you have anything to say?
My screen is froze. Oh, now it's not.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, I just want to tell Sharon that I sure appreciated all the work she's done. It's just wonderful to really realize what they went through. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. If there aren't any more questions, well,
Christie,
yeah.
I'm probably the only one here that's not related to everybody. I'm not related to any of the Sperrys other than through marriage. But this is this is monumental. I mean, I can't believe the work that you have done to get this put forth that people can understand their family. I was here with Christy the other day and I started reading it and I said, hey, this is fantastic. I mean, I'm getting to understand some of your family. That would never have happened without these letters and being able to read them.
Yeah.
They were mind-boggling. They were mind-opening, you know, to be able to read what some of their experiences were. Because we never get to see some of the parts where people were not really very happy about being pioneers. I mean, they were not terribly happy sometimes.
Especially William.
And Betsy.
Anyway, congratulations. I think it's a fantastic job.
Thank you. And you know, I think your comment is really good. The letters are immediate. So we know what they're really thinking. It's not the retrospective of 40 years later, you know, it was all worth it. You know, how you view things when you've lived through it and it all turned out for the best. In Betsy's mind, it's not turning out that well. And Marianne wasn't excited about it. All of that was just really interesting to me because I was always raised on the retrospective stories of the pioneers and it was hard, but they're so glad they did. And I'm sure she would have said the same thing at the end, but you know, not at the time.
Yeah, super meaningful for all of our ancestors, but William, you know, he might not have made it here. I just wonder what triggered his ability to continue, because it sounded like he was, you know, maybe ready to go back east.
You know, I had the sense, and you undoubtedly will know more than I do, but from the letters, it sounded like he'd been sent back to do some business in La Harpe. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it sounded like from what he told Sarah, he intended to go back west, you know, in the fall. That was always part of the plan. Now, was he more hesitant than that? Do you know, or?
I think it was just one line in the letter that made me think that he maybe wasn't as committed. He was more like his mother. You know, maybe had enough of this. I don't know.
Yeah.
I may have read something in that wasn't there.
It's hard to know. And sometimes with the punctuation, it makes a difference too. The emphasis, it's, you know, because we're just kind of guessing on the punctuation. But I had the sense that my sense is that Joy was very much in charge of his family and the boys did what he told them to do. And he had them out working, you know, earning money while they were in Iowa. And that William went back because Joy told him to go back and to take care of business. There's some mention of notes that Joy has, and I think that they're trying to get paid. William was probably trying to get some money that people owed them. That would be an unpleasant job too, especially going back into that anti-Mormon fervor, you know, which was very rampant. Sarah mentions that in her letter, that Hancock County is just crazy at that point. And she's standing up for the Mormons and she just tells them what she's thinking, but it sounds like it's really volatile. So poor William to have to go back and try to get money.
You know, I just did a little bit of research on the Sidwells, who they kind of traveled out with. And William actually married a Sidwell.
Right.
My impression is that is kind of what eased him across, was the Sidwell family. They kind of helped him make the adjustment because they kind of became almost parents. And it looks like that. I mean, we don't know that, but it kind of looks like that because they settled next to each other and they were in company and all those kinds of things. So I don't know. I think that he had to have
right next to each other in the fort, their house. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, it is.
Well, and Charles mentions that he hated Mount Pisgah, except that he met this girl there and she became his wife. And so that was kind of, and she goes on to winter quarters and they cross the plains together and they get married. And I think that got him through a lot too. So, maybe the two boys that helped them. Poor Harrison, Harrison and Betsy. And
Oh, yeah, Betsy's story is sad. I'm excited to learn more about her from this because I think her story is sad.
yeah, it's interesting.
Doesn't that sound very modern? That the only thing that got me through is that I had a summer romance. Sounds like young adults today. Oh man, I hated that young single adult conference, but or oh man, I hated Trek, except there was this,
Yeah.
I think it's true. I think it
Well,
happened.
Yeah, and they crossed the plains early enough. I don't know they didn't get until October, did they? So I think the early people that crossed the plains, it was a little easier because the water was cleaner and the grass was more abundant. And so maybe it wasn't as bad. And then they had 2 wagons. I thought that was interesting. So
That's the other thing is it's interesting that they actually built a house at the fort because most of the people coming in that late lived in their wagons. So I thought that was interesting. They actually, I don't know. I mean, they were a little ahead of some people anyway. I don't know. It was interesting.
Now, did William go down to Nephi too with Charles and Betsy?
Yes.
Okay.
And so did the Sidwells.
Hmm.
He basically went, that's what I'm saying. He followed the Sidwell family. I think that they had a real connection.
Mhm.
So
So
Clark
Harrison,
has something he wants to share something with the group.
oh, Clark, good.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Clark, what comment did you have?
A python can eat an alligator.
How lucky they are they didn't have pythons and alligators in the Mississippi River. Even before the Platte.
the lower part of the Mississippi absolutely has alligators.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, down by Mississippi, for sure.
What about you?
Yeah, that's true.
Mom, did you want to say anything before we end the call? Oh, you need to unmute. Unmute.
Did you unmute it?
Yeah, you can talk.
I guess I'm the oldest one here. And I have read all the letters and I was happy to be able to find out what really happened to those people and how they felt. I guess the Charles that you talk about, or that's talked about in these letters, he was the brother. Was he the brother of Joy, or was he the Charles that went across the plains?
Charles that went. Yeah, he's the Charles that crossed the plains, Joy's son.
And he came back.
So aren't there 2 Charles? The one that did join the church. He was Joy's brother, did join the church, but he didn't like Brigham Young.
Right. And then there's Charles that was Joy's son, and he crossed the church and was very strong. And then Sarah Abbott had a son, Charles, who ended up going west and marrying his cousin, and he joined the church too.
Oh, so there's Charleses. And I was kind of mixed up to who they were, but now I'm straightened out. That's
For now.
Everybody, who is the person that's the second one down that has a picture, has dark hair?
Nora Ann.
Nora Ann, yeah. How are you relation to me?
I am, oops. Okay, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay, my great grandma was Arilla Sperry. She was one of the twins.
Oh, yeah.
They had Arilla and Drusilla.
Uh-huh.
And so she would be I would be the 3rd great granddaughter. Yeah.
Oh,
It's like,
distant cousin too.
yeah, because like Christy said, you were from the older brother. But, yeah.
Right, we're from John William, and you're from his, the younger sisters, right? The twins?
Yeah, there were 2 twins, Arilla and Drusilla. And they lived in Nephi, and we lived in Nephi for a time, 4 years. And I didn't even realize that their house was still there. So I
Hmm.
feel bad I didn't get a picture of the house that they lived in, but I just had little tiny kids and I wasn't really, you didn't have your phone, you could snap a picture easy.
Right.
But
Now,
It's
What?
gone now, or is it still
well,
there?
when I drove through, it was quite recently, I thought, well, that looks like the same house on the corner, because it was on a corner, but I wasn't quite sure. And there's a lot of Sperrys in Nephi still.
yes,
And when we lived there, I never did find out how close we were related. But while we were serving a mission in North Dakota several years ago, you know how you do your phone relatives around me? I was able to, the mission secretary was in the office and we did that. And we were sitting there and we're like, whoa, we're third cousins. And we found out that she was from Drusilla Sperry and I came from Arilla. Drusilla died really young, like 32, but Arilla lived to be pretty old. And she got moved down to Wayne County, Lyman, Utah, which is where I grew up. But she always went back to Nephi in the wagon because she loved Nephi so much. Took her days, but her husband would take her back.
Someone that wanted to get on today and didn't make it is a couple that's serving in winter quarters.
Oh, that's the Chapels, they're our relatives.
Right.
Peggy,
So
Peggy and Dean.
Peggy and Dean. So I think
Yeah.
that's so cool. They're right there in winter quarters now. So I'll be sending them this video.
Yeah, we went there on our mission. We stopped there too. And there was a lot of relatives and people buried that you could see where their little names had been carved in stone and stuff.
So Sharon, there is nothing there to memorialize Mary Lamont. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. There's a big, like a pillar kind of stone. And I think the descendants, I don't remember which family it was, were the ones that got behind it in the early 1900s. And I think that they canvassed people that they'd known had had relatives who died there who contributed to putting up the stone. And then, you know, Mary Lamont isn't one, maybe they didn't get in touch with any of her descendants. And I don't think they kept that good of records, but it made me kind of sad she wasn't there. But it's an interesting place to go. It's way out of the way. It was,
Do
you know,
you
but
think that's something that we should be working on? Or was Joy, do you know if his is marked at all? I don't know. I've never been to these places.
I'll
I know
have to
there's
ask them in winter quarters. They can look for us and see if Joy and Aaron are noted, because that's where they died, was at Council Bluffs. So that's kind of across the river from winter quarters, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that there's a big marker in the Salt Lake City Cemetery where Joy and Mary's names are listed, but that might be something we ought to do as a big family, right?
I think it would be really cool if Mary was on Mount Pisgah. I just feel like there should be some place that, you know, gosh, her sacrifice is acknowledged in some sense, you know, just by having her name there.
Right. Any final comments here?
I'd like to just think these letters are incredible, genealogically wise, but I was really touched by how all these people in all the letters, they talked about what they were doing to live. This many acres of oats, this much of this much, so many bushels of apples. Some of the trees are freezing out, and life was not easy. And I remember one mentioned, all my time is taken up doing this, yet I really like to do that. And they were an incredible group of people, and they were just living their life day by day, trying to do the best that they could and the best they knew how. And if you've been in Nauvoo, you know down that President Hinckley dedicated a monument right on the Mississippi River. And it has all these, it has Aaron, it has Joy, and it has Mary Lamont listed there as pioneers who died at some point getting to Winter Quarters or to Utah.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. I'm going to go on one of my trips. I'll have to go up there.
I think when we were there, we took pictures of all those names because we knew they were related, and then we thought, well, we'll figure it out when we get home. But you can take a picture and it has, like he said, all the lists of names of ancestors.
Let's get a photo of that and put it up on Family Search. I have a friend serving in Nauvoo. I'll see if she'll take a picture so that we have that to memorialize them, and and have it up on Family Search where people can access it. Well, it's always hard to end Zoom meetings, but we do have to end it.
Well, thank you for putting it together, Christy. It's been nice to meet everybody. It's cool to be.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone that took time this morning to talk about our family. There's lots of comments in this message. Everyone's thanking you, Sharon. So,
I do have one question. Is the musicality, is that something that's gone down through your family as well? Were William Sperry's descendants musical too, like Joy was, or?
In my family, my great grandma, yes. I guess I should just answer by saying yes. Our family is very musical and we've passed that tradition on. And I just think it's kind of cool to know that we inherited some of that musicality.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too.
we also have music. It is a common thread.
Yeah. Well, I'm married to a descendant of Ebenezer Beesley, so my husband is very musical.
Very musical.
Yes. So our kids know where they got it. Well, it's nice to meet everybody. Thank you, Christy, for putting it together. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you to all. Bye now.